So hi, Terry. Thank you for coming on to the podcast today. The first question I'd like to ask you is, you've had a really diverse career. Could you share with our listeners a bit about your background and how that has led you to where you are today?
Sure. So first of all, Kyle, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you. Yeah, I was born on the south side of Chicago, one of the largest cities here in the United States. I'm the oldest of three boys. Can't tell this from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After my Wendy's stint, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. I thought they did such a great job that I wanted to be part of that. And then at 37 years old, made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, I started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball. But for the last 12 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years, and we have one child, a daughter, who's in the military here in the United States.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that overview. And it's really interesting that you've worked in so many different fields and had to adapt to different skill sets, I guess. And just for our listeners, what was it like being a hostage negotiator? That's such a unique job.
Yeah, usually your next door neighbor is not a hostage negotiator in that. It was a lot of fun. It was, usually SWAT teams on law enforcement agencies are usually the best officers with the best training and the best equipment. And I've always wanted to be part of the best in my life. So when an opening came available as a negotiator, I put in for it and was lucky enough to get chosen. And it really, there have been a lot of movies out there that sort of show the star of the movie as sort of this one-man Superman who does everything. And it really is team effort when you're negotiating. Yeah, you will have one person that's strictly talking to the person, but you're going to have other people that are sending you notes or working the crowd, finding out more information, intelligence. Because a lot of times when we would show up on scene, somebody would barricade themselves with a gun. We had no idea why they did that, what got them to that point. So it was pretty much working with people, one, that you've never met before, two, that are having probably the worst day of their life. I mean, if you're talking to me in your house is surrounded by the police, you're not having a good day. And three, trying to develop trust with an individual who's in a crisis mode at this point in their life.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you say, I'm sure it's heavily romanticized in the media and film. So I guess there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. But yeah, I would love to talk more about your cancer diagnosis. You were diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, and can you walk our audience through the moment when you first received your diagnosis, and how did that affect you, both from from a mental standpoint, really?
Yeah, so I was a girls' high school basketball coach when I had a callus break open on the bottom of my left foot, right below my third toe. And initially, I didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, "Terry, I think you have a cyst in there and I can cut it out." And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it. No dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I get that call from him. And as I mentioned, he was a friend. And so the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming. Until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, "Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years and I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have an incredibly rare form of melanoma. Most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun. It affects the melon, the pigment in our skin. Mine has nothing to do with sun exposure. It's just a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet and the palms of the hands. And when I was diagnosed, I was told I would be dead in 2 years. They had absolutely nothing to offer me other than surgery. And Kyle, I know I went through all the stages that we would associate with grief. You know, first it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then I got angry. You know, I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then our daughter was in high school when I was diagnosed. So then there was a sort of bargaining with God. Hey, could you please let me live long enough to, see our daughter graduate from high school? And then I absolutely got down. I got depressed. I started feeling sorry for myself. And then I just came out the other end and was like, well, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck. I do not like the cards that I've been dealt, but I'm going to have to play these cards to the best of my ability. And God, 12 years later, God has decided that he wants to keep me here. So I've been battling this for 12 years. I had my foot amputated in 2018. I had my leg amputated in the middle of COVID, and I still have tumors in my lungs that I'm treated for every 3 weeks. So this has been just an ongoing battle for 12 years.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it sounds incredibly difficult, but as you say, being able to change your perspective on suffering in a way is really positive, because you need to just get on with your life, and if you just succumb to it, you just be giving up essentially, right?
But a lot of people do that. A lot of people do. It's like, you hear the C word. I got cancer. Oh, that's it. I'm dead. And, I've always wanted my life, I guess, to be based on the decisions that I made, not on the decisions that somebody else made or that I didn't make. So I take a real active role with my doctors. Why are we doing this? What do you expect the outcomes to be? What are the side effects? I want to know as much information as possible. But I know a lot of people who, I've got cancer, they just turn their life over to a doctor, somebody with a lot of initials after their name on their coat, and say, whatever you say, doc, whatever you're going to say. And I just never, the doctor didn't know my mind, didn't know my mindset. They're kind of like bookies. They're like, okay, for a person of your age, in your health, with your stage of cancer, you're going to live X number of years. Mm-hmm. Okay. But what doctors don't know is you want to see your child graduate from high school. You want to be there when they graduate from college. You want to walk your daughter down the aisle. And those events, those future events, are incredibly powerful to keep your mind moving, your mind and your body moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And would you say that there was any kind of mindset that you had there that helped? Did you just think, like, obviously initially it must have been quite overwhelming, but then did you just think, okay, I'll just crack on with this, and do the best I can? And did you adopt any kind of lifestyle changes, or?
I did physically. One of the techniques or tests that my doctor used to use to figure out where my cancer was, if it was progressing or not, was what was called a PET scan. And don't ask me what PET stands for. It's some really long name that I can't pronounce. But it basically involves injecting you with radioactive sugar, with the idea being that cancer cells have a higher metabolism than the rest of the cells, and so they will pick up that radioactive sugar at a higher rate, and that's what glows on a scan. Well, nobody told me this, but I thought, well, if cancer likes sugar so much, maybe I shouldn't be eating as much sugar. Maybe I should, move more towards fruits and vegetables and away from breads and desserts and candy and all that kind of stuff. And I did. I stopped doing that. I don't drink soda. I don't drink alcohol. I don't eat bread. I don't eat desserts. I mean, don't get me wrong. Once in a while, will I have a pizza or something like that? Yes. I'm not fanatical about it. But at the same time, can you do things to help yourself? And there were physical things that I could do with my body, but then there were also mental things that I could do. And I do. And I'll and I do that. Okay, that's really bad. I shouldn't have said that. But what one of the things that I recommend, and I do this every day of my life, and I'll recommend it to your audience. Every day, do one thing that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but if you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we lose somebody who's close to us, we unexpectedly get let go from our job, we find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness, you will be so much more resilient to be able to handle those things than people that never get outside their comfort zones and challenge themselves.
Oh yeah, definitely 100% agree with that. I've tried to embrace more discomfort in my everyday life because not only because it makes you more resilient, but also, a lot of things to do with growth and putting yourself out there are from discomfort. So I think it definitely is something to be embraced. So resilience is a key theme across all of your work. So how do you define resilience, and why do you believe it's so essential for overcoming physical and mental adversity?
Yeah, I think resilience is just continuing to move forward, continuing to struggle, to find a way over, through whatever it ends up being that you're facing. And when I got cancer, I've seen so many people in my life that started down the road toward whatever it was, building a business or having to deal with a disease or something like that. And then something gets in their way. There's an impediment. Something stops them. And they can't get over it, around it, or through it. And so they quit. They give up. But we just don't give up. Now we got to blame somebody. And when I got cancer, I had several people were like, well, oh, you got cancer. Who do you blame for getting cancer? I'm like, what do you mean, who do I blame? It's like, well, you've got this horrible disease. You must blame somebody. And Kyle, I've had all 88 genes that doctors know of or suspect cause every form of cancer that we know tested. And I have no mutations in any of my genes for any form of cancer, which certainly begs the question, then why did I get this cancer, especially this very rare form of cancer? Nobody's ever been able to answer that question. And I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. I got it. And so I'm going to have to deal with it. And so, when people find out I also have a faith life, then they sort of get to well, you must blame God because God gave you this cancer. And I used to joke with them. I'm like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, checked his to-do list and said, hey, Terry Tucker, cancer today. I don't believe that at all. But I do believe that's part of the reason I'm still here, that there's a strength that I've been given from our Creator that says, you know what? Why not me have cancer? What makes me special that I shouldn't have this disease? There's no reason. I can have cancer just like everybody else, but can God's power, love manifest in my weakness, in my disease? And I think it can, and that's really what I try to put out there when I do these podcasts or I talk to people in person.
Yeah, that's really interesting for you to say, and I think that I'm a scientist by trade. Well, I was until I've kind of changed my careers around. But I think it also comes down to just luck. Like a lot of people think, oh, why did this happen to me? But it can happen. It can just happen to anybody. And I think, I've been reading quite a lot of books recently to do with self-improvement, for example. And I feel like in today's society, a lot of people will kind of play the victim, as in, why has this happened to me? And complain about it more than actually taking positive steps to face it. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, everybody, not everybody, but there are a lot of people that, oh, woe is me, look at me. This horrible thing has happened to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has. Yeah. And it's not that people don't care about you. But a lot of people, well, why aren't all these people coming to my rescue? It's not that they don't care about you. They just care about themselves more. And they're dealing with their own stuff in life. Whatever that ends up being, there's that old quote, and I'm going to kind of mess it up about, you never know the difficulty or the pain that other people are going through. And so be kind to those people. And, and don't get me wrong, Kyle, I think I still have treatment for the tumors that I have in my lungs every 3 weeks. And when I get those treatments, I get down, I get depressed, I feel sorry for myself, I cry, I do all that stuff. But I find when I do that, I'm looking inward. I'm kind of what you just said. It's all about me, and look at me, and I feel bad, and all that stuff. And I find a very easy way to kind of flip the script on that, is to go just talk to somebody. Say hi to somebody. Hey, how's it going? Are you doing okay? You want to have a cup of coffee? Do you want whatever it is? Now all of a sudden, the focus isn't on you. It's on another human being. And it's amazing how your whole personality changes, because you're not thinking about yourself anymore. Now you're trying to make a positive difference in somebody else's life, and that changes the whole paradigm.
Oh yeah, definitely. I really agree with you on that. And you're not just dwelling in thinking about the same thing over and over again. You kind of not distracting yourself, but once you kind of shift it away from yourself, I think it can definitely help. And so what kind of daily habits or routines do you have that has allowed you to maintain like mental strength and resilience? Is there any practices you have?
Like I said, I try to do difficult things every day, even if it's as simple as I take a shower and I flip the water as cold as I can at the end of the shower. Now I think the science is still out on whether cold therapy works or does anything for us. But the bottom line is it's uncomfortable. And if I can be uncomfortable just taking a shower, well, then I can certainly be uncomfortable going through my treatments and things like that. So that's one thing I do. Another thing I do is unplug every day. There was a study done at the University of Minnesota here in the United States with college students. And they basically put students in a room with nothing but a table and a chair. They weren't allowed to have their devices with them or even a pen or a pencil. And they were only asked to stay in there for like 15 or 20 minutes. And the other thing that was in the room was a buzzer. And if you pressed the buzzer, you received an electric shock. 68% of the men and 25% of the women shocked themselves during that 15 or 20 minutes. And the conclusion of that study was basically, we don't like what's going on in our own heads. We don't like, thinking about the thoughts that are coming through in our heads. Our whole existence, being, is tied to these devices that we have. So I don't think that applied to me at all. But I thought, every day I'm just gonna unplug. I'm gonna spend 10 minutes just sitting alone with whatever thoughts come into my mind, and be comfortable with that. And then the other thing I do every day is I spend about an hour in prayer, in addition to listening to a 528 frequency, a tone that, Nikola Tesla used to talk about. Everything in the world is a vibration, is a tone, and things like that. And 528 is a tone that makes me feel good. So I do that, and I also do a breathing, a Wim Hof type of breathing, where it's sort of a fast-paced, sort of hyperventilating type of breathing, and then a hold, and things like that. So I do some of these uncomfortable things that hopefully are helping my body as well as my mind to deal with this disease.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that, especially with the fact about discomfort. And I think, I've recently just read a book called How to Do Things You Hate. I'm not sure if you've heard of it or read it, but...
No, I haven't, but I might. Thank you.
Okay. So in the book, one of the things they talk about is the fact that humans are so used to being comfortable in every moment of the day, and a lot of people feel that they need to be entertained at all times. So, you may be waiting in the doctor's office or something, and you're just mindlessly scrolling on your phone to distract yourself, essentially, from thinking and, just being bored. So I think even just being bored and, just doing nothing can make people feel uncomfortable, but I think that's good. I mean, you improve your focus, you're not feeling like addicted to, just mindless content engagement. So... yeah, I think that definitely plays into it as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, we have things that can distract us. I mean, I'm old enough, I didn't grow up with cell phones. I mean, I grew up with a rotary phone in our house. So when you left the house, you couldn't communicate with anybody and things like that. I mean, I didn't grow up with all these cable channels. I grew up with 3 main channels, and then we got cable, as I grew up and things like that. So you had to entertain yourself. You had to use your imagination whether it was playing with my brothers or playing individually with, sports cards that we had or little army men or whatever it ended up being. So you had to sort of get creative with yourself to entertain yourself. And one of the other big things I do is I'm an avid reader. I love to read. One of the things we were always taught as hostage negotiators was to be curious. Always be curious about the person you're negotiating with. Always be asking those questions. Well, I think the same thing applies to our lives. We should always be lifelong learners. We should die learning, not get to a point where, hey, I know it all. I don't need to learn anymore. I love people. I love those connections. I love being curious about other human beings. And most of what I read is biography or autobiographical things because I love to know what make people tick. Why did you make that decision? Why did you do that or not do that? And things like that. So be curious in your life. It's fun.
Yeah, and you can learn so much about other people, which can then teach you things about yourself, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So, you've spoken about kind of the power of choice when you face adversity. So could you elaborate on how making deliberate choices impacted your journey and helped you thrive despite all the challenges you've been through?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I want my life to be shaped by the decisions that I made, not, or the choices that I made, not by ones that other people have made for me or that I didn't make for myself. But that's me. And I think a lot of people, and I use that word, more thoughtfully, a lot of people don't like to have to make those choices. They want other people to make choices. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to do it. Tell me when to do it. And that's comfortable for them because they don't have to think. They don't have to entertain themselves. They don't have to sort of get out of their comfort zones. And if you think about that and apply it to life, to business, to relationships or something, if you have even a little bit of grit in your life, you can be so much more successful than all those people that just kind of sit back and be like, yeah, I'm good. No, I don't want to challenge myself. No, I don't want to do that. It's amazing what you could do with having just a little bit of gumption, a little get up and go, a little bit of grit in your life. And so many people, they either don't have it or they don't want to have it. They want other people to tell them what to do. But I think we all have desires. I think we all have goals in our lives, things we want to do. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, an amazing book. He was a Holocaust survivor during World War II, talked about how we shouldn't live our life in the abstract, that everybody has a purpose for which they were put on this earth to do. And I think small minds and weak people kill big dreams. They always say the most lucrative real estate in the world are cemeteries because they're areas rich in books never written, businesses never started, relationships never pursued. When you go to the cemetery, make sure you don't have those regrets.
Yeah, definitely. That's very poignant there. So going back to that point is I think a lot of people avoid things because they are afraid of failure. But something that I try to live by now is if you don't embrace failure, then you'll never progress because you'll never know what it was, and you'll live life with regrets, and you learn from mistakes at the end of the day.
I agree. I 100% agree. And I think fear is one of the biggest reasons that hold people back from doing things. And I know I've done it. I know I've done that in my life where I've wanted, to start something and you sort of pull back and you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I don't have enough information, or maybe I'm not smart enough, or what will people say about me if I fail? One of the chapters I wrote in my book is entitled, Most People Think with Their Fears and Their Insecurities instead of using their minds. And I always tell, especially when I have an opportunity to speak to young people, that I tell them that there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be those things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd like to say there's a quote. I can't tell you who it's from. I just read it recently, and it's something about you have two lives, and the second one starts when you realize you only have one. So yeah, definitely plays into that thing.
Life is finite. That you only have, if you think about it, such a small amount of time on this earth. And I kind of tell a story about my grandparents, my mom's mom and dad, who, when they got married in 1925, so almost 100 years ago, they lived separately for 2 years after they got married. And the reason they did is they couldn't bring themselves to tell their families that they were in an interfaith marriage. My grandmother was Catholic and my grandfather was Presbyterian. I mean, can you imagine that? You know, somebody you love that much, you get married and you live apart for 2 years because your family won't accept that. Think about how far we've come in that, in terms of accepting people for who and what they are in their lives. And so, I mean, we're here for such a short period of time. I mean, think about it. I mean, Kyle, 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember you or I were even here. But one of the nurses who takes care of me used to be a hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know about hospice, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life. It's end of life care. And she gave me a book to read. And the book was called Imagine Heaven. And it's a book about people who have near-death experiences. A lot of interesting things in the book, but one of the big things I took away from it was no matter who the person having the near-death experience saw during that experience, whether it was God or a saint or an angel or a friend or a relative, almost everybody got asked one question. And that question was, how do you treat my people? In other words, how do we care for each other? How do we connect with each other? Like I said, 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember I was here. But what I'd like to be remembered for are the connections, the relationships that I had with other people. That is so important in our lives. And in society today, it just seems to be, you know, it's all about me. Me. You got to do what I say. You got to feel the way I feel. No, you don't have to feel that way, but get those connections. And I'll end with this. The way we used to negotiate with people when we had no idea why we were there is we would start out with what we used to call tactical empathy. I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. In other words, Kyle, help me to understand where you're coming from. And the important word to understand there is the word understand. Not agree. I mean, if you just murdered 3 people and I was talking to you as a negotiator, I wasn't going to agree with you. But by understanding builds trust, and trust gets me to a point as a negotiator where I could try to get you out safely.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. It's very interesting. I think, everyone should treat other people with empathy because everybody is unique and has had their own life experiences, and people's opinions do differ, but you kind of have to understand the person to know why they may think that way.
You're right. But, you know, we've gotten to a point in society where if you and I don't agree, somehow then you've become bad. You become a bad person. And that's not the case. We can disagree on things and still have a relationship and still have a connection and still be friends and things like that. So it's not an all or nothing. It's not a zero-sum game that if you don't agree with everything I feel, then you're a bad person and I don't want to have anything to do with you. We are unique. We all are a product of our experiences and our education and how we were brought up and things like that. We're going to have differences. That's okay. We can still be friends with each other.
And so, bit of repetition here, but so when you were dealing with your cancer, treatment, for example, and I read in your biography about how you were having treatment for 1,660 days or something along those lines. So this must have had a massive impact on your mental health when you were there. You're going in for treatment, and you obviously probably get into a cycle of worry. And how did you deal with that?
Yeah, so when I was diagnosed, as I mentioned, I was told that I'd be dead in 2 years, that they had no treatments other than surgery to offer me. So my doctor put me on a weekly injection. And the hilarious thing is I did this to myself. I actually injected myself with this medication called interferon. And the side effects of the interferon were that it gave me terrible flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having a horrible case of the flu every week for 5 years. And Kyle, I was to the point where if you would ask me, what are your goals? My goal was literally just to survive today. I felt so terrible, so down. I mean, we've all had the flu. Imagine having it every week and having it for 2 to 3 days out of that week. And I mean, sometimes a good day was literally, I got to get out of bed and I got to make it to the couch. That was winning the day for me. And I kind of felt there were two camps. There was the living and the not dying camp. And I felt like I was in the not dying camp. I wasn't living. I wasn't producing. I wasn't productive. I really wasn't doing anything. And I literally, yes, mentally, I was like, look, God, I am not living. I'm just not dying. So take me out of this. I never contemplated suicide, but I did ask to be removed from this pain and suffering and ugliness and everything. But obviously he didn't do that to me. He didn't take me out of it. But what I think God did was give me the strength to be able to handle it day to day. And it literally was, I mean, if I woke up the next morning, I was going to do the best I can that day. And then the same mindset the next day. If I woke up the next morning, then I was going to try to do the best I could that day. It was a tremendous mental battle to keep my mind and my body moving forward.
Yeah, I can imagine that, and that sounds really hard. And I think it's the fact that that is the treatment as well, and it's giving you these horrible symptoms. And then you probably did. I don't know if you did, but maybe you started to feel maybe anxious about, I have to take this treatment again, and I'm going to feel like this again. Did you feel like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Your body knows. I mean, you would think. So I would take my injections on Saturday night. So Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, I was down. I was out. And then you would think, okay, so you start to feel better Wednesday, you start to feel better Thursday. And so Friday should be your best day. But it was almost like my body knew it was coming on Saturday. So it would start to prepare. It would start to sort of steel itself against this next round of injections. And it was almost like I started to feel worse even before I took the injection. Like I said, it was almost like my body knew. And so obviously my mind had to know because it was telling my body, well, here we go again. Oh, we're going to do this again and we're going to do it. And I remember when my doctor said, I would like you to do this. Interferon is also used for people who have hepatitis, so have liver problems. And I was coaching high school basketball. One of the grandmothers of my players was taking interferon for a liver condition. And so I talked to her before I agreed to take this. And I said, what do you think? And she said, oh, you know what? It's hard. You're going to be uncomfortable, but you could do it for a few months. No big deal. So, I kind of go marching into my oncologist's office and say, hey, okay, all right, I agree to do this. I know I can do it for a couple months. And she looked up at me and she was like, well, I'd like you to do it for 5 years. And I remember looking at her, Kyle, and being like, wait a minute. You want me to have a horrible case of the flu every week for 5 years? I'm like, that's like masochistic. That's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. And she's like, just do the best you can. Because she knew she had nothing else. There was nothing else to offer me. And so it was like, just do the best you can. And I thought there was no way I would even come close to 5 years. And I round up. I got 4 years and 7 months before I ended up in the intensive care unit because the drug became so toxic to my body that I had a body temperature of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. Somehow I survived that. And again, I think it was more God getting me through that.
Yeah, that sounds really tough. And so you stopped taking the treatment afterwards, and what was your life been like since then? Like, have you been having any other therapies or what,
Yeah, so I stopped taking the drug. So started in 2012, 2017, ended up in the intensive care unit with that 108 degree fever, had to stop the drug. Too toxic to the body, and almost immediately the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot after I stopped it. So 2018, I had my left foot amputated. Cancer worked its way up my leg. 2019, had 2 more surgeries on my shin. And then in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, I found out that my entire lower leg was full of cancer and I had these tumors in my lungs. So literally right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, I had my left leg amputated above the knee, and I still have these tumors in my lungs. I've been on chemo, and now I'm on a trial drug that does nothing to the cancer, other than remove the protein or the enzyme that cancer secretes that hides it from your immune system. So my own immune system, at least I've been on this drug for 4 years now, has been keeping the tumors in my lungs at bay. They're still there, but they haven't grown and the disease has not gone anywhere else.
That's at least that's some good news. And I just want to say, I think you're amazing that how you managed to keep such a positive kind of outlook and trying to help others even in this sense of adversity.
Thank you.
That's okay. So to get through all this, who has been your greatest source of support during your battle with cancer? And like, how important is a support system when facing adversity such as this?
I think it's huge. I think when you get a chronic or a terminal illness, there tends to be isolation. You know, you're sort of isolated from your friends initially, and then your family, and then if it goes long enough, from yourself. You get isolated from yourself. And I always talk about what's gotten me through this, you know, are my 3 F's, which are faith, family, and friends. We've discussed, you know, my faith in God. Like I said, it's just my daughter and I. And I remember when I had these tumors in my lungs and I had my leg amputated, my doctor wanted to start me on chemotherapy. And I looked at him and I said, is it going to save my life? He said, probably not, but it might buy you some more time. And I said, well, if the outcome is going to be the same, if I'm going to die anyway, I would rather not be that sick, and I'd rather have whatever time I have be as higher quality as I could. I said, but I'll go home and talk to my family about it. So I go home and I start telling my wife and daughter, and my daughter's immediately, all right, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that, you know? So we end up sitting around the kitchen table and individually talking about how we feel about me having chemotherapy. And then when we're done, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. I'm like, wait a minute, am I getting outvoted for something that I didn't want to do? But I remembered when I was in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I love my wife and daughter more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. It was the bridge that got me to the drug that I just talked about a minute ago. And then I guess the last thing are my friends. And I'll say this about friends. There were people that I was 100% convinced that if anything horrible happened to me in my life, that they would be there. They would be supporting me and helping me through it. And several of those people, when I got cancer, you know, at almost 50 years of age, were like, nope, can't deal with this. You're too young. You know, what do you mean you're going to be dead in 2 years? I can't deal with that. And had to back away. And Kyle, then there's also been these people that I never expected to be there in my life that have never left me during this 12-year cycle. Faith, family, and friends are really what's gotten me through this disease.
Yeah, that's great. I think, you know, having people around you for support, even if it's just someone to talk to, can really help, especially mentally. Just not offloading, but you just talking through your troubles and feeling through them can just make you feel better. We're social animals, you know. That's just part and parcel of who we are. So, yeah, I think that's really important. And you know, you've mentioned through your biography that pain can be a great teacher. So what are some of the important lessons that you've learned from your experiences, and how can our listeners apply these lessons to their own lives?
Yeah, I think, at least for me, I needed to find meaning in the misery of what was happening, of what was going on in our lives. We had a writer here in the United States that died back in the 1960s by the name of Ernest Hemingway, a very prolific writer. And he wrote a book called Farewell to Arms, which was a semi-autobiographical novel about his time as an ambulance driver during World War I for the Italian army. And there's a line in that book that I absolutely love, and I try to quote it as much as I can. And the line is this: life breaks everyone, and afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. So understand that we're all going to have things in life that are going to beat us to our knees. But just like if you break your arm and a doctor sets it and puts it in a cast, when that arm heals, it will be stronger at the broken places than it was before it was broken. that's a metaphor for life. That's the way we can be. If you can deal with mental illness, if you can deal with cancer, if you can deal with losing somebody close to you or getting let go from your job or whatever it ends up being, and come out the other side stronger, more determined, more resilient, you will be a better human being. And again, how do you do that? You go back and you do things every day that make you uncomfortable. And as you mentioned, that's how you grow. That's how you get better. That by stepping outside our comfort zones. But so few people realize that. So few people ever think about what it means. I would say 90% of the people in the world never, ever, ever contemplate what it means to be great in their lives, in whatever capacity that is, whether it's your job, being a great dad, mom, whatever that ends up being. People don't think about that. Think about what's important in your life. Think about what your values are. Think about where you want to be at the end of your life. What legacy are you going to leave, and how you go about doing that. I mean, there was a study done by Merrill Lynch, which is a financial management company, about older people. And almost 90% of those people felt that leaving a legacy had nothing to do with anything material that you leave behind, money or the house or the car, or whatever. Mm-hmm. It had to do with what we've been talking about: connections, relationships with other human beings. You said it a minute ago, being able to unload, being able to talk to another human being. That's a connection. That's bringing you and I together as human beings, because as you said, we are social animals.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd just like to ask you another question, which is, so from my own personal experience, I've talked about in previous podcast episodes, is I had a psychotic episode this year and I was in hospital, had a panic attack. I thought I was going to die, essentially. And, my whole life leading up to that point, I definitely engaged in lots of unhealthy kind of behaviors. And this happening to me kind of put things into perspective, where I could kind of notice these patterns and kind of think that experience in itself, I think, has made me a better person in the sense that, as you say, with the resilience factor, that I feel now that I can be more resilient and embrace more challenges. For example, I've started this podcast. It's something that I've always wanted to do, help other people. And it goes back, again, as you said, to your core values. So would you say your experiences pushed you into that more? It made you want to help other people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've learned a lot through this cancer journey, but I've learned two incredibly important things. One, I don't think you really know yourself until you've been tested by some form of adversity in your life. And my guess is you would agree with me on that.
Definitely.
Being comfortable doesn't really but when you've been tested and you come out the other end and you're stronger, yeah, that's great. And the second thing it's taught me, and I've been asked this before, if you could live your life over again.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this.
Cancer, yeah. Would you do it?
Yeah.
And honestly, Kyle, I don't think I would. Because I think cancer has made me a better human being. It's made me focus, as you just said, on the values, on the things that are important in my life. And I've spent so much of my earlier life, doing physical things. I was a college basketball player. I was a police officer. I was on a SWAT team. And now I don't have a left leg and I'm in a wheelchair. So how do you balance those things? And I think when you can't do what you're good at, you do what's important. And I really think that that's what I've been doing in my life, doing what's important, trying to give back, trying to make a positive difference in the lives of other human beings. And for me, that's really all that matters today. It's not about making money. It's not about being famous. It's not about talking on bigger stages. It literally is trying to make a positive difference in another human being's life.
Yeah. I agree with that. I feel in the same way. I think it is, even, having a small impact on someone else's life can not only make you feel better, but then you're also making the person feel better. So it works both ways. It's a mutualistic relationship, and it's great what you're doing. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. Some of our listeners might be going through either mental difficulties, depression, or anxieties on massive uprise at the moment, and maybe some people have some physical health issues that are listening in. So what advice would you say for them to build their own resilience and inner strength, like to get over these challenges?
Yeah, I would definitely say surround yourself with good people. I've always said I think it's more important in your life who you work with and who you work for than it is the work that you do. I would suggest finding people who care about you, finding people who are willing to invest in you, finding people who want to see you be successful in life, and hitch your wagon to those people and climb your mountains together. And I think you'll find, and I found this, I've seen so many people do this, Kyle, that they feel they're born empty. And that when they get out of school and they get into life, whatever that looks like for them, that then their job is to fill up their empty self. They've got to make the most money, and they've got to have the nicest house and drive the nicest car and have all the latest gadgets and gizmos. And what I found is it's just the opposite. We're not born empty. We're born full with everything we need to be successful, however you define that word in your life, already inside us. We just need to find it, pull it out, and use it to our benefit. So our purpose in life should not be to fill ourselves up. Our purpose in life should be to empty ourselves out with our unique gifts and talents, certainly for the betterment of ourselves, but also for the betterment of our families, of our friends, of our communities, and of our countries. And when you make that paradigm shift to, it's not what I can get, because there's always going to be one more thing to get. There's always one more thing. If I get this, then I'll be happy. Well, I got that. I'm still not happy. And if I get this, well, then I'll even be, no. It'll be emptying yourself out. It'll be, God gave me these gifts and talents, and those gifts and talents can be used to help other people. When you make that paradigm shift, it's amazing how much your life improves.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you're living your life where you think this next material thing, this next job is going to make you happy, then you kind of admitting that you're not happy now, and you need these things to feel happiness, where the happiness should really come from within. And it's a lot to do with acceptance of yourself and what you are, and focusing a lot on the present moment while keeping your values in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just a different way of looking at life. And, society tells us, advertisers tell us, marketers tell us, well, if I drink this soft drink, or I drive that car, or, I wear this cologne or perfume, that I will be whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's external things determining the internal part of you, your values and things like that. I mean, those things, at the end of the day, they don't matter. Nobody's going to remember when you die what cologne you wore or what car you drive. And 100 years from now, people are going to be living in the houses we live in now, doing the jobs that we do now, socializing with the people that, we socialized with. And nobody's going to care that you did all that stuff. It's all about the relationships that we have and the values that come from ourselves. And if you understand that, if you can figure that out, and sometimes, again, I think you have to face adversity in your life before you really understand. I can talk about this all day long, but unless you live it, you do it, you may not understand what we're talking about, what Kyle and I are talking about, because it's not, I don't get it. I haven't had adversity in my life. Well, when you have it, you'll understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's life changing, really. Like, how I guess it's your perspective on life completely changes, and you learn to appreciate what you have now and be grateful what you have now more, and put the less value on other things that really don't matter.
Well, and I think you also, so many people think, well, my life doesn't matter. My experience isn't important. Nobody's going to learn from me. I'll tell you a quick story. I had a nurse that was taking care of me, and initially when I met her, she was about 25 years old, so a fairly young nurse, and was already a nurse, but learning how to do things on the unit where I'm taken care of. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came in and she said, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I don't know how to tell it to you. And Kyle, I didn't know how to respond to that. It's like, well, I hope you decide you want to tell me the story. And so she's in and out for the next couple hours doing things medically for me, and then comes in and sits down. She's like, all right, here's the story. She said, when I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I had a very good friend of mine that had died. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my family. I was going to quit nursing, and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, and then I met you. And I see what you go through. I see how difficult your treatments are when you come here. And then I went back in your file and I read your amputations, your interferon therapy, and everything you've been through. And she said, and when I finished reading your story, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that just my life, just the way I live my life, had had such an impact on her. I can tell your audience right now, there are people out there that are watching how you handle the difficulty, the problems, the adversity that you have in your life, and would give almost everything they have to just walk 5 minutes in your shoes. So never think that your life doesn't matter. Guarantee you it matters to somebody else, and it may be somebody that you have no idea who that person is.
I think it's really nice as well to hear that you've kind of inspired someone as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just think, oh, I'm just me, but then someone will give you a comment and you think, oh, actually, I do have the ability to inspire or make other people's lives better. Because, yeah, as we were saying, a lot of people think they are insignificant, but I think if everybody just did a little thing, like, the world would be a better place.
Yes, it would.
As you continue on your current journey, what do you have any current goals and hopes for the future, both personally and in your mission to help others?
I really don't focus on goals anymore. I focus more on processes in my life. Am I doing things optimally that'll make me get to a point where I have better relationships, that I'm physically better able to handle my treatments and things like that. So I'm always looking at the things that I'm doing. Can I do that better? Like I told you before, when I did my first podcast, I was horrible. I mean, I'd started a speaking business, COVID hit, nobody was doing any speaking, either virtually or in person. And somebody reached out and said, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? And I said, sure. What's a podcast? I had no idea what a podcast was. That's how in the dark I was. And he explained it to me, and I said, sure, I'll come on and be a guest. Kyle, I had Post-it notes all around the camera. He would ask me a question, I'd kind of lean in, and I'd read a Post-it note. I was horrible. I provided no value whatsoever, but I kind of saw the value in this medium. And I thought back on my life. It's like, the first time I drove a car, was I any good at it? No. I mean, the first time I cooked a meal, I think I burned the water. The first time I studied algebra, I was terrible. But I wanted to be good at it. And I remember I was talking to my publisher, and I said, Scott, I listen to every podcast I've ever been on because I want to have better stories. I want to see how many times I say hum or what. And he said, no, Terry, it's not about being good. It's just about not sucking. And I said, well, thanks for the title of my next book. Just don't suck. That's not going to be the title of it. But I said, no, I want to be good guests so the host feels that this was time well spent and that we are providing value to the audience. So, I mean, that's kind of how I look at my processes. Am I doing the things that will make me optimally the best person mentally and physically that I can be?
Yeah. Thank you for that. I was just distracted there, just thinking about what you said. I already asked this question, but just separately, is if you could go back in time and change your life to never have experienced the adversity, would you? But I guess the more reason is why.
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I look at my life and the things that have happened, and I've had a great life. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've really done some fun things, interesting things in my life, but I wouldn't change it, because I think all the heartache, all the adversity, all the hard things that I've faced in my life have taught me things and have made me a better human being. If I hadn't experienced, if I got rid of all the negativity, all the bad things that happened, I wouldn't be the person sitting here before you. I wouldn't be, somebody probably you would even be interested in interviewing. So I've taken those hard things. Like you said, so many people, especially younger people, feel that success is something that you know what it is, but somebody started here and then they're successful. The road to success is paved with failure, is paved with mistakes. And I'll give you a quick story. There's a man here by the name of Jesse Itzler in the United States, and Itzler's very, very well off. He was part owner of a professional sports team, but he's married to a woman by the name of Sarah Blakely. And most of your female audience will know about Sarah Blakely. She started a women's undergarment company called Spanx. And Spanx is multi-million dollar company. But Itzler, her husband, tells the story about how she started that business. She started with one prototype and $5,000. That's all she had. She'd been a door-to-door, and most of your audience won't even know what a fax is, a facsimile salesperson. And his point of telling the story was that he said if she would have waited until she understood the marketing and the public relations and the human resources and the distribution and the manufacturing to start Spanx, he said, I guarantee somebody else would have come up with that idea and run with it. So his point is, wherever you are in your life, wherever you are in your journey, just jump in and figure it out as you go along. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to blunder through it. But we tend to think that success is the top of the mountain or the end of the rainbow. Where life is won and lost is in that journey to the top of the mountain or the end of the rainbow. And that's what people don't get. Life is about all the stuff in between. That's where you live your life. It's not about making it to the top. It's about living the life to get to the top.
Yeah, I love that how you phrased that. I have a story of my own, which is just that I actually, I live with my granddad. Well, he has an annex next to our house, so I speak to him quite often. He's 86 now, and I've spoke to him before about, oh, granddad, if you could go back to being 21 years old again, would you do it? And he's like, no, I'm much happier with my life experience now, much more comfortable in his own body now than he ever has been. And it's kind of crazy to think that, because most people, I guess, younger people think, why would you do that? But until you've lived those experiences and everything you've learned along the way, you can't really quantify it.
I mean, you're right. And it's the living, but it's also, and I think more importantly, it's the learning. What did you learn during that living? What did you learn during that experience? And how can you apply that as you move forward in your life? The world's been around for a long time. And with the internet and with the devices that we have, we don't have to make the same mistakes that other people have made. People have started companies and businesses and gone to school, and they've made all kinds of mistakes. And those are out there for you to look at and say, hey, you know what? I can do this, but I don't have to make that mistake. I can get around that. I've learned from that. What have you learned from your living, and how can you apply that to your life moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to ask you if there's any final message or piece of wisdom you'd like to share with our audience, so especially those who might be struggling right now.
Yeah, let me say this, and I'm going to tell you another nurse story. All I got is nurse and sports stories, so that's all I got. So I had a nurse ask me, actually fairly recently, she said, what was it like to have your foot amputated and your leg amputated? And I said, well, as you can imagine, it certainly hasn't been easy. I mean, I'm 6'8" tall, so learning to walk again, falling is not an option. You get hurt from this height, so, falling is not an option. But what I told her is cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Kyle. That's who everybody who's listening to us really is. And we spend a tremendous amount of time, working on the exterior, working on the body. We go to the gym, we get enough rest, we eat right, we reduce stress. We know what to do with that. And I'm certainly not telling you not to do that. I think you absolutely should. But what I am suggesting is this. Maybe every day, spend a little more time working on who you really are, your heart, your mind, and your soul. We know at some point in our lives, this body's going to die, it's going to decay, it's going to go away. But our heart, our mind, and our soul, I believe those things are eternal. I believe they live on. And I just don't think we spend nearly as much time working on them as we probably should.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Terry. And I'd just like to ask for our audience if you'd like to share, your book or any resources that you found in your journey that are useful to you, that you resonate with.
Yeah, there's a book called Legacy. I mean, I certainly, want to tell you about my book, but I mean, you can get that book on my website. But this book is called Legacy. It's written by a man by the name of James Kerr, Kerr. And he basically embeds himself with the New Zealand national rugby team, which by most accounts is the most successful sports franchise in any sport in any country of all times. And there's so much in that about connection, about relationships. I mean, just give you one quick story. So much of my life when I went for a job interview, you always felt you had to have all the answers to all the questions. And you would do your research on the company and the people you would be meeting with and all that kind of stuff. The way the New Zealand national rugby team is called the All Blacks because their uniforms are all black. The way they hire is they certainly look for talent. Are you a good rugby player or a coach, depending on what you're being hired for? But what they want to understand, or what they want you to understand, is they don't expect you as an individual to have all the answers. What they expect is for you to work within the team, within the framework, to develop, to come up with the answers. And there's just all kinds of great information in there about life lessons, about leadership, about being the best you can be, and things like that. So whenever I get a chance to plug the book Legacy, I try to do that.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. I'm a rugby fan myself, and I didn't actually know that about the All Blacks, and you can tell that from the way they play. To be honest, no wonder they're so good. But yeah, thank you very much, Terry, for being a guest on today's podcast.
Well, Kyle, thanks for having me on. I enjoyed talking with you, and